Welcome to LawNext. This is Bob Ambrogi, and today I am joined by three guests for a conversation about how law firms are navigating the urgency around generative AI adoption while staying grounded in practical realities. We recorded this conversation live at e-discovery company Everlaw's annual summit in San Francisco, where artificial intelligence was very much the talk of the conference. From new product announcements to candid discussions about how law firms are actually putting these tools to work. My guests today are Adam Borgman, a senior associate in the Labor and Employment Group at Vorys, Seymour and Pease, Julie Brown, Director of Practice Technology at Vorys, and Joshua Schnoll, Everlaw's Chief Marketing Officer. We'll talk about how this firm has taken a disciplined approach to mapping their workflows before plugging into AI, why understanding what you're currently doing is the essential first step before adopting any new technology, and how tools like Everlaw's newly released Deep Dive are helping attorneys find insights across millions of documents that they might never have discovered on their own, including, as you'll hear, a rather unexpected story involving Tums. We'll also discuss the cost considerations, the trust factor that still gives many lawyers pause, and what advice these experts have for firms that haven't yet started experimenting with Gen AI. I am Bob Ambrogi, and this is LawNext, the podcast that features the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. Before we get to any of that, please take a moment to hear from the sponsors who so generously support this podcast. Running an immigration practice requires precision and efficiency. That's why LawNext offers over 40 predefined immigration-specific workflows, all with unlimited customization options. Combined with the most comprehensive questionnaire database in the industry and real-time collaboration features, you can streamline every aspect of your cases from intake to completion. Ready to transform your immigration practice with intelligent workflows? Visit LollyLaw.com today. That's LOLLYLAW.com. You didn't go to law school to waste time writing and responding to discovery requests. Never waste time on discovery again with BriefPoint. BriefPoint drafts your discovery responses and requests for documents within minutes of your first sign-in. BriefPoint is the most reliable discovery drafting solution on the market, and it works right out of the box. Get your first document drafted by going to briefpoint.ai and clicking Get Started. No credit card required. BriefPoint. Draft what matters, automate the rest. Now let's get to today's conversation.
This is Bob Ambrogi, and I am here at the Everlaw Summit in San Francisco, where we're a lot of conversation going on here about artificial intelligence, new products and new tools from Everlaw in particular. And we're going to talk about all of this here, or at least some of it here on this panel, maybe not all of it, with several guests here who are experts in this area. And before we get into the conversation, why don't we just kind of go around and have everybody introduce themselves? So Adam, you want to kick it off?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Adam Borgman. I'm a senior associate in our labor and employment group at Vorys, Seymour and Pease. Usually out in Columbus, Ohio, but here in San Francisco last few days for the Everlaw Summit.
Thanks. And Julie.
I'm Julie Brown, the Director of Practice Technology at Vorys, Seymour and Pease. I have the pleasure of working with Adam on cases on a regular basis.
And last but not least, Josh.
Sure. So I'm Joshua Schnoll, run the marketing team here at Everlaw. And Bob, thanks so much for having us on today.
Inside Baseball here, Adam and I just finished up a panel on which we talked about a little bit some of the issues we're going to be talking about here. But one of the topics we talked about on that panel was this idea about the urgency that's being created around adopting generative AI tools. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's wondering about them. And there is this kind of sense of we need to be doing something, but we're not necessarily sure what to be doing, what we should be doing. But Adam, maybe you could kick it off by talking a little bit about you at your firm and your practice, how you're kind of getting around this sense of urgency or building on this sense of urgency.
Absolutely. I think that there's kind of market urgency as it exists between firms or, in competition. And then there's this other sense of urgency, which is, similar to scrolling through Netflix and seeing their, 45 new shows. It feels like you have to make a decision, but you might not have to just yet. And in either case, whether you're going to adopt it for competitive purposes or you're just trying to identify what tools are going to work best for your organization, we kind of sidestepped the urgency because we realized that the bigger question we needed to be asking is, what are we currently doing? And I think only when you can answer that question accurately in summary fashion, from beginning to end, what are we doing? Can you begin to put AI in place that augments those systems in a way that actually creates efficiency? And one of the examples that we ran through early on was, depositions. I think that's one of the most exciting potential applications here. It stands to change the most about. And when we started, we kind of reached the finish line and saw this great functionality and insight, but realized that we were operating in a vacuum because the details, the information, and everything else had been developed previously in the case. So we took a step back and said, what do we do? What do I as an attorney do 80% of the time? And where do we want to go from there? So I'm currently working with Julie, and we're in the process, and others, but we're in the process of writing down just what we do in brief snippets, from associate to partner to client to court to opposing counsel, where the work goes. And we're now starting to, in the last month or so, identify the areas that AI will fit in. We don't need to, pick the market winners right now. The market will bear that out. But we were identifying the opportunity, at least as it exists inside our current operation.
Yeah. Julie, what about you? How are you kind of adapting to the urgency around this?
Yeah, I think we're doing a little bit of both. So I think, we started a project 2 years ago to identify our information management team, identify how we could deliver generative AI to our legal teams. And it was a very disciplined approach, so it did take away from some of the urgency, but at the same time, we knew we had to start putting generative AI in place immediately. So with Everlaw coming out with generative AI tools early on, we also were early adopters of Lexis Protege, and we also now have purchased an agentic platform that's allowing us to create our own agents. So I feel like we're doing both. The urgent part is somebody comes to me and says, I have a problem I'm trying to solve. I'm jumping in, I'm building an agent, I'm saying, here's a solution. And not just me, we have multiple people on the team that do that. But then we're taking this very pragmatic approach by looking at not just Adam's practice area, but all practice areas across the firm. We have a team of about 10 people in our information management team that are doing the process mapping for every single practice group. And what's going to come out of that is not just where can we put Gen AI, but where can we use automation? Where can we, so we'll be creating these streamlined workflows and then applying the technology where we need it.
Yeah. As I'm listening to the two of you talk about how you're using AI, what strikes me is that you're starting from second base. I mean, it sounds like you're at a firm that has already been ahead of the curve in terms of adapting or thinking about these technologies, because I'm sure there were people in the audience of the panel we just did, and a lot of other people maybe listening to this now, who would you say, let's look at where we might need, where we can plug this technology in. It means you kind of have to have some understanding about the technology to even get there, right? So I wonder if you could just kind of talk about, I don't know, the culture, how it is that your firm is sort of already thinking about this stuff, maybe ahead of what some other firms are doing.
I mean, I think one of the things we did, so in November of 2022, I believe, when ChatGPT made its debut, we were pretty quick to create a policy, first of all, about using publicly available tools. But we also did the first thing I remember, and I believe it was in July or August of 2023, we did a workshop for all our attorneys, and we brought them into a room and we showed them the workflow GPT. We compared that and Gemini and, the different platforms at the same time. And we had these exercises. They had to enter information, and it was, the light bulbs were going off all over the room. It was just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So I think exposing them to that really early, understanding the limitations because those were publicly available tools. But then as we started purchasing, products that were safe and they could use, and that was in January 2024, I believe. So not long after. We have a technology adoption group, so they've been involved in developing training programs, and I feel like we have a full team working on how do we do this and how do we do it well. Whether we're helping on individual matters or we're trying to build a solution for our clients.
Joshua, how does what you're hearing Julie and Adam talk about compare to what you're hearing from your other customers? What are you hearing from the market?
Sure. I mean, I think Vorys is a great example of an organization that's been very tech forward, but also from a process standpoint, really breaking those elements down. I mean, there are some other organizations that are doing similar kinds of things, but there are others, going back to the policy, where, even here, talking to some of them is like, we don't have a policy yet. And so without having that policy, there was a conversation I was in where it was like, we're stuck in this chicken and egg situation where we know we need to use this. We have an urgency to go do it, but we don't have the policy in place to handle that. And I think it varies also by the kind of organization. I think, law firms, potentially corporations may be a little bit further ahead on this journey. On the public sector side, I think that can get even more complicated. And so, I think we've got the full range that we see. And really just try, for example, on the public sector side, there's some guidance that, been, provided policies, at the federal level, so at the state level, or even at the municipal level, they can sort of take some of those pieces in that particular context. I mean, I do think there are a lot of folks just with sort of basic policies as well, just to get started. I think there are others who are saying, you know what, the urgency is so great, I'm not going to wait for the policy. I'm going to structure some experiments and, I'm going to push ahead with the technology and try to figure out, working through saying, hey, this is what my workflow looks like. I'm going to apply this in these areas because I think it is truly something that is going to be very impactful for my business.
Julie, if I could come back to you, obviously, as we've just talked, you're somewhat ahead of the curve in terms of working with these tools and making these tools available to your teams. What's been the impact of that? I mean, what are you seeing in terms of, is it making a difference in the cases? I know it's probably hard to generalize across cases, but to the extent you can generalize, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think it's providing our attorneys with insights that they may not have seen. I think Adam talked about it on the panel where something jumped out right away that was picked up by the generative AI that would have taken a very long time to discover, going document by document. So I think that's a huge advantage. I think eventually, we're going to see time saved, but I don't feel like we're there yet because the reality is I feel like we're still in an experimental phase. So teaching the attorneys, training the attorneys, them writing the prompts and figuring out how to use the tool and make it the most value it can be. I think there's some investment time, I guess I would say. So you're losing some time. I figure probably within 6 months, we'll start to see more time savings. Obviously on document review, we've already seen some of the cost savings or time savings there. But on some of the tasks, I feel like it's such an iterative process. And when you're drafting or you're doing some of that stuff, it's like kind of like, okay, but you can see eventually you're going to be so much better at it. And you're going to be able to go in and write that prompt and from the first mark, hit what you want. So, yeah.
As Julie just mentioned, you gave an example in the panel we just did. The Tums story, I guess, is what it will go down in history as. But do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So the speed to insight was something that I think it would have been the first couple of tests that we ran. We set up a sandbox environment with the files that on a case that I had recently resolved. And I knew everything inside and out. I had done all the fact investigation, done all of the interviews. I just knew it like the back of my hand, learned way too much about this person in the process. But we needed a case that we could use as a gut check. will I know, looking at this, if it's accurate or not? So we kind of jumped in and started what we were most excited about, and that was depositions. Like this is going to be a game changer. And we put in the transcript, just the transcript, so that Julie could show me the, discrepancies and inconsistencies, and just ran it through. And the very top hit struck me, and I was like, it was the perfect example because it just showed me the potential here. So at the beginning of any deposition, I'll ask the person, are you under the influence of any medication that would impact your ability to testify truthfully or recall facts accurately? This is just a check to make sure they're not, drunk or high sitting in front of you. Later in the deposition, at some point, there was some mention of the deponent having taken, Tums for heartburn at some point. Now, ordinarily, when you're done with your line of questioning, the other side gets to do a chance. And while they're doing it, you're listening intently while also following up on things that you're running questions. So this spit out in a moment for us an inconsistency. And that inconsistency was earlier, the plaintiff testified that they had not taken any drugs or medications. However, later, the plaintiff testified that they had taken a bunch of Tums before their deposition. And what struck me about it was never in a million years would I go back on the record and say, excuse me, but earlier you said, on the I'm not going to go impeach them with that at trial. But what struck me about it was the nuance. I could have read that transcript 100 times and with the goal of identifying every inconsistency, and I never would have flagged the Tums, are you drunk or high question connection. And the fact that it did it was language-based, was an immediate helpful proof of concept that I was worried about the language. Human language is tough. This nailed it the first time, and I laughed about it, but I had a register of things that I could then go through and do that bespoke legal strategy, make those decisions. Ordinarily, you might go into lunch and sit down and write down what you can remember, and this can generate it instantaneously and probably with more detail. So if I have a menu of items now that it generated for me, I can spend my time working on actual substantive, thoughtful follow-up in addition to whatever else I've written down. So it was the Tums story, I guess, was just one of those things that I had to laugh when it happened, but I also, I had to give it the seal of approval because that was a great catch. But yeah, it's been pretty incredible.
Yeah. I forget what you said. That was using deep dive?
That was using
Deposition summary.
the deposition summary.
Deposition summary. Okay. You also talked on the panel today about using deep dive. There was a question toward the end of our panel. What's your favorite tool? It's something along those lines, and that was your answer to that. Deep dive was just announced for general release here at the conference. It's been in beta for a while, but why don't you kind of talk a little short what that is?
Yeah, so deep dive allows you to ask natural language questions of a full document corpus. And so, we've in the beta program, one of the sort of key things that there were a couple of key principles in designing this. One was that it was simple, so the natural language to make it very easy for you to have a conversation with your data. But the other piece was around scale. The largest matter that we had in the beta was 10 million documents. And that's where we really think this impact is like when you have a large document corpus and you are curious about these nuances. It's great to hear this story. I hadn't heard the Tums story before, but it's great. That kind of language nuance, but to be able to do that over a really large set of documents. And then the last component to it is that once you ask those questions, it provides you an answer, but it also has all of the verification. And so you can link back directly to the documents that it's citing. You can also see a table down below. So you'll be able to see, hey, these are the documents that it found to be incredibly relevant for that particular answer. But it'll also show you ones that were slightly relevant and will give you that list. And then it'll also show you things that are like, maybe, but not really. And so it really gives, the person who's using and asking these questions, the ability to verify in a very easy and simple way, and allow them to then dig into those documents and, find more.
Yeah. So useful in depositions. I mean, where else are you using it? You guys have been part of the beta, right? With Deep Dive, you've been using Deep Dive. Where else have you seen it useful? Using it for like ECA or
Yeah,
some pros?
several areas. I think first, investigation. So when you're doing an investigation, you're just trying to figure out who are the people, who are the events, what's going on, what happened. It's excellent for that because you can go in and just start asking questions, and not only does it give you the documents, but it gives you a written like response as to why it pulled those certain documents, which I think is highly valuable because the attorney can actually read that, and yes, they can validate the documents, but it's giving an explanation of why they were selected. So we see it in investigations. We see it in, we've used it in QC. So after we've done predictive coding, we've went back in and said, what did we miss? Did we miss anything? So you can start asking questions and say, is there anything that we didn't identify through either search strings or predictive coding? And then the other one is depo prep, understanding what does this person know about X, Y, and Z? And what do other people know about it? Are there documents that conflict what they think they know about it? Those kind of questions can all be asked with Deep Dive.
Yeah. Adam, what about you? Where else are you seeing kind of applications for this technology and work that you do?
You know, Deep Dive is one of the things that I'm most excited about using more regularly, especially on large cases. But I guess its applications really are kind of limitless. I do one type of work, labor and employment, species of litigation. It's adversarial. But one of the coolest things I think this presents is the opportunity for you to go in and know, based on your information as an employer or as a company defending a claim, what their best case against you is. You don't have to wait to find out details in mediation or to meet and confer on a discovery dispute to better understand their theories of the case. Because what you can do is take that corpus of information and check it. What are their best arguments? You can almost gamify the process of litigation by running those checks as you go. Where is the evidence is ultimately the question. The theory might not be connected to evidence. That happens in cases, right? You're the worst. There's some shadowy cabal of evil people making horrible decisions. Like, I hear that in just about every employment case. But, how the facts bear out is different. What is their support for? So it's great that it can not only go and help you find what's important for the defense, but I think the more important information is what's harmful for the defense. And being able to ask those questions in plain language, you're not going to find a human being that is an expert in 2 million documents. And maybe you will, but I don't necessarily know I was born with the capacity to have that. But you could walk into this room and ask Deep Dive to give you the information, and it'll give it up. So the bespoke strategy element here is you can almost gamify this to check at each point. So the goal is, who's the better strategic thinker? If this can always give you the facts you need, who has the better strategy? Who has the better presentation? I just think that that's kind of theoretically, it's not playing out yet, but I think that's one of the most fascinating things. And beyond that, learning more about yourself as a business, learning more about your clients through the things that they've provided, you've provided them. I just think the scale of what Deep Dive is able to do is what makes its potential.
And I agree. The scale is so every GenAI product we've used to date does not scale, except for Deep Dive.
For the numbers of documents?
Yeah, like they all have limitations. So Lexis Protégé has a limitation on how many documents you can upload. Our workflow GPT, we have some limitations. So when Everlaw said you can search the whole thing, I'm like, really? Like, really? And of course, I had to prove that it couldn't. So our first test case was 300,000 documents, and we were just sitting there going, like, when it came back with the answers. So it really does scale well.
Yeah. Do you think that at this point this gives you an upper hand or an advantage in the cases that you're involved in? And does that continue as more and more firms begin to adopt this technology?
I think that from my perspective in my use, that we're in an exploratory kind of experimental phase. this has to be, defensible in a way that, I could describe, or my team can describe exactly how these records, what's the chain of custody, where do they come from, proving authenticity and other things, what decisions we made regarding discovery or something we can write about in a declaration in motion practice. So understanding what it's capable of, verifying its accuracy is kind of where we are. But yes, if you can prove it up and it's right, you're not going to get, any attorney or anyone working on this asleep at the wheel for just a little bit. This is comprehensive. It's consistent. Instead of 20 people reviewing with all of their individual decisions and nuances to their decision making, it just kind of does it all at once, and it's an immediate source of information. I can't imagine what could be better, than having this if your opponent doesn't. Now, again, if both sides do, if it comes down to strategy. But until then, yeah, I think you're at a disadvantage if you don't have something like this that can provide the peerless speed to insight that it provides.
I've been speaking with Adam Borgman and Julie Brown from Vorys, Seymour and Pease, along with Joshua Schnoll from Everlaw, about how Vorys has taken a methodical approach to AI adoption, mapping workflows before plugging in technology, and how tools like Everlaw's Deep Dive are delivering what Adam calls, quote, speed to insight, helping attorneys surface connections across massive document sets that would be impossible to catch manually. When we come back, we're going to broaden the conversation a bit to look at what's happening across the industry, where e-discovery is headed, and whether generative AI might eventually change how opposing counsel exchange information altogether. But first, please take this opportunity to learn about the sponsors who so generously support this podcast. Need a faster way to get paid while serving clients in multiple languages? LawNext's native payment processing offers the widest range of payment options in immigration law. Create invoices and payment plans in under 30 seconds, accept payments via SMS and QR codes, and provide client payment portals in over 20 languages. Plus, with robust scheduled payment plans, you can maintain a steady cash flow while giving clients flexible payment options. Modernize your firm's billing process at lollylaw.com. That's LOLLYLAW.com.
The $10 million call doesn't always come during business hours. Sometimes it's 10 p.m. and there's no one there to answer. Eve AI Intake is the always-on system trusted by top plaintiff firms to capture every lead, qualify every case, and make sure the biggest opportunities never slip away. Firms like Mike Morse Law are already using Eve to handle after-hours calls and keep million-dollar cases from slipping away. Visit eve.legal/intake. That's eve.legal/intake so you don't miss the next $10 million call at 10 p.m.
Welcome back to LawNext. This is Bob Ambrogi, and I'm bringing you an episode that we recorded live at the Everlaw Summit in San Francisco recently with my guests Adam Borgman, Julie Brown, and Joshua Schnoll. And we're talking about how law firms are putting generative AI to work, particularly in the e-discovery space. Before the break, we heard about the practical applications of tools like Deep Dive for investigations, deposition prep, and quality control. Now we're going to turn to some of the bigger questions: how firms are balancing cost against efficiency, whether attorneys can really trust the outputs from these systems, and what this technology means for the future of legal work and job security. Let's get back to it.
Excitement, I think, about Deep Dive. I've heard a lot of people talking about it. But it's, of course, only one of a suite of AI products you've already developed and offered to your customers. I'm wondering kind of what you're seeing in terms of a pickup of those products. I mean, to what extent are customers actually using these new AI-driven tools, and to what extent are they still maybe a little fearful or reluctant or just insecure about using it?
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about a little bit before, it varies tremendously by organization. We had some organizations that were here, up on stage talking about their use. I think one of the interesting things about 6 months ago, what we were seeing, particularly with things like coding suggestions, where we can use the generative AI to sort of create the prompts and sort of allow it to sort of suggest the appropriate coding, where we were seeing that being used initially were situations where someone was against the wall. They had, a very short time period. There was no way that humanly possible they could go through and use some of the standard techniques. Manual review no way would be possible. And so their thought was, all right, we've got this technology. This would be a great time for us to try it out. And so what we saw is that they were having really good success with that first experiment. And so as we move forward, let's say about 6 months, those same kinds of organizations were now beginning to think, oh, how can I integrate this into my overall first pass review? How do I think about that process to be able to do that and do this systematically, not just in the situations where my back is against the wall, where I can really apply this much more broadly. Vorys is not the only organization here that has shared that, potentially if your organization is at the forefront of this right now, it can provide you an advantage in terms of, if the, opposing counsel is not doing this, it is absolutely something that can give you an advantage in some of these cases. One of the other interesting examples that someone had given was, some of the tactics of, all right, we're going to give them, big deposition is tomorrow. We're going to give them a last minute production at the last moment. And instead of being distracted by that last minute production, if they've already put in place the appropriate protocols, et cetera, with coding suggestions, they can just drop that production right into coding suggestions, understand what do I have in this production, something that is going to be important or not important, and move on very quickly to really focus in on that deposition the next day. And so there are some ways that they're explaining how this has been incredibly beneficial for them.
Jay, you mentioned earlier that we're still kind of in the early days of this technology. But where does it go in terms of, again, the panel we were just on, one of the panelists kind of talked about first pass review and what the implications are of this for the future of how we do first pass review. We talked about predictive coding, and you've heard people speculate, does this mean the end of using predictive coding? What are your thoughts on all of that? Does generative AI ultimately become the tool for everything you do in e-discovery?
Not sure. What I do think is, predictive coding is still a really good tool, and it's free in Everlaw. So there's an argument to be made that, and a lot of folks that are using the coding suggestions are doing that to create their seed set, and then they're using traditional predictive coding when you're going against, 1 million or 2 million documents, because it's free. So I don't think predictive coding is going away. I think manual document review is going away. And I would love to see in the future where we could find a way for deep dive to get worked into how we do discovery in the future. Meaning, if you look over like at the UK, they produce the most responsive documents. They don't produce every single piece of paper that might tangentially relate to the case, right? Which is what we do in the US. But if there's an opportunity to really reduce costs of discovery, reduce the cost of reviewing documents, and maybe round one of discovery is we produce the most responsive, and then you can come back and ask for more. But I also like the statement in one of the sessions yesterday was, maybe eventually we just exchange prompts, right? The other side, their request for production are the questions they want us to ask deep dive. And that's what they get. And we do the same thing. So I would love to see a time, it probably won't be before I retire in 3 years, but I feel like if that could change, that would be huge for the industry. I also look at tools like extractions, which is so powerful. And that's another somewhat new feature. I mean, because it used to just extract one field. Now so we're using that even in the corporate world for contract review and lease reviews and all that kind of stuff, because you can go across, again, thousands and thousands of documents and have it extract pieces of information into a table. And if you think about paralegals and lawyers taking information and putting it into a table so they can use it, it does all that for you now. So when you look at all the features and you start putting together, and then the drafter and story builder is huge. I mean, it's an incredible suite of tools, and I feel like it's going to touch every part of what we do in eDiscovery. But I think we'll be using all those tools.
If I can just add on, I mean, that is one of the ways that we really think about this, is that it's not just a chatbot that exists in this sort of moment in time in the overall investigation or litigation lifecycle. These tools can be relevant across the entire range, from the beginning, from the early investigation phase all the way to the end where, you're in final trial prep in those different areas. So, we want to make sure that, when you hit that little button, with the generative AI capabilities, that is really relevant across that entire life cycle. And that's really the way that we think about it, as opposed to, it's the isolated piece just in this one section, or in this one particular use case.
Yeah. I almost hate to ask about it because it's talked about so much, but trust is still an issue with generative AI, especially among legal professionals. Have you encountered that, and what's your response to that? I mean, how should lawyers be thinking about this technology in terms of their ability to trust the outputs from it, the results that they get from it?
I think part of it, so early on when people were using the publicly available tools, and people still are, and they ask it a question and it comes back and it makes up stuff, right? But when we're talking about like Everlaw, the questions we're asking are against our own documents. It's not going out and making up something that doesn't exist. It's still important to validate, but I think the best way, and what Adam talked about, is that sandbox case we set up to gain his confidence, because he knew the case, he knew what the answers should be, and so he was able to go in and build that kind of trust. That's one thing I think with Deep Dive we see when we do the demo with the attorneys. If they know their case pretty well, like say they're going into deposition and they start asking questions, they already know what the answer should be, and that helps build that trust. So, I mean, a lot of people say, well, LLMs are going to give a different answer, or could give a different answer every time. And I would agree, slightly different, but I haven't seen in Deep Dive where we're getting completely different answers each time we run a question through.
Yeah. Although I will quote AJ from the press conference today, who said AI is always going to hallucinate. There's nothing we can do about that.
We admit, and I think any provider who says we can eliminate hallucinations 100% is not telling the truth. But I think the way that we think about it is to make sure, and you can structure it to really focus in on the specific documents at hand, and then also provide that clear path to verification to allow the legal professional who is looking at those answers to see, this is the reason why, here is the actual document that it's pointing to, and here is the text in that document. And so by providing that full path there, it allows you to really know, okay, this is my source of truth, and this is how it got to this reasoning about this particular issue. And I think that's a really key piece.
Another impediment to adoption at some law firms has just been cost, or at least concerns about cost. Everlaw made some announcements here at this conference relevant to that, and maybe you can explain that. And then maybe we could hear from you about how you're kind of balancing some of those cost issues and addressing that.
We've always had a philosophy at Everlaw when we originally sort of came out with the per gigabyte, all-inclusive per gigabyte model, back when, we originally started selling our core product. We really tried to put all of the value into that core gigabyte rate. And we have really, as we've added new features and, predictive coding and clustering, transcriptions, all of those audio, video, transcription, et cetera, all of those different pieces we've been able to add in. Generative AI was just a little bit different. One of the core pieces around this is that, all of the sort of top providers are all going to want to use the top models. And so if you're looking at OpenAI or Gemini or Anthropic, they are not inexpensive. And, just like, the latest iPhone, if you, the new version comes out, it's still $1,000. And if you want to buy the previous or the ones behind that, then you get a little bit of cost savings. But we feel that, we should be at the top models. And that's what our users demand. And so that cost is substantial. And the scale, if you're looking at 10 million documents, that cost is quite substantial. And so what we've done and what we've announced at the conference and that is that for a lot of these sort of smaller kinds of scenarios, single document where you're doing a summary or requesting a coding suggestion, we're including that in the core gigabyte rate. For the writing assistant, where you're able to ask questions, et cetera. With the writing assistant, where you're able to draft a summary or an outline or a list. That's also something that we're going to be including in the core per gigabyte rate, and we're not raising that rate. But for these large batch actions, where you're potentially going to be do coding suggestions on a large corpus, we are still going to be charging for those. And we did also announce that we are reducing the price on that by 40%. And so we are definitely, doing our best to try to make sure that we're passing whatever savings that we're getting onto our end clients as well. But those are some of the things that we are looking to try to do.
Julian, how are you kind of balancing the cost issues versus the effectiveness and the efficiencies you get out of this technology?
Right. I think, first of all, we have top-down support, right? Managing partner came out and we are doing Gen AI. So I think the firm is willing to invest and commit to this and figure out how we do it well. So obviously you can't buy every tool on the market. So we've spent an awful lot of time evaluating tools to determine which one would be the best fit. So for example, Lexis Protégé, we were an early adopter. So I think we actually got some pretty good pricing on that. Everlaw we already had. And to be honest, a lot of the functionality we're using in Everlaw is not ridiculously expensive. I mean, I try to tell our attorneys, when you see those tokens, understand it's like 3 cents. So even if it's 100, it's not a lot to actually do a task. So obviously if you're scaling to 10 million documents, it's going to cost, right? But when we looked at like an agentic platform, we evaluated and did demos on, I think, 15 different platforms, and they're coming out all the time. And so we were trying to follow and track all the platforms coming out. And we ended up settling on one that we're pretty happy with, which was a startup company out of the UK. And of course, with a startup company, you're going to get better pricing, right? So we've been using that as well. So,
And one other big issue I think that stands in the way of using AI, at least for some legal professionals, is just this sort of fear of the implications of what it means for the future of their job security. And that's probably lawyers and lit support people alike as they look at this technology. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, lawyers built this system that we forced everyone else to use, right? We wrote the laws, they're confusing, ambiguous, built a whole system, adversarial system to sort out the laws that govern us. So, but inherent to that is just language is always going to be tricky. So for everything that these tools promise, there's still going to be reasoning, independent judgment, strategy decisions, and other soft things that I think are going to come to the forefront. It might obviate the need for manual doc review. I'm certainly still reviewing my documents. But, there was a time where they'd be printed in front of you. Now maybe they're in a review system on a computer. That was a transition that happened pretty naturally. I don't think it's crazy to say that having a, technology assisted review at the level that, Deep Dive can prepare a summary that you might be able to use as your fact session and a motion for summary judgment. You still have to walk in the room and take the deposition, and you still have to prepare the motion, double check the case law, keep the client happy. So am I worried about the capability? Slightly, because I don't know what the outcome is. I don't think it will replace everyone completely, but I think if you're not able to use these tools and achieve that efficiency, it might not be your firm that demands it. It might be your clients. And in either instance, I don't think you'd want to be the one sitting on your hands. So I think this is exciting stuff. I was happy to be invited to come to the summit for this reason, because I see the potential, but I'm a little bit worried about it.
For firms who aren't as far along this road, Julia, as you are, any thoughts, any lessons, any advice for how to get started with this technology or how to move forward with this technology?
Yeah, I mean, you just have to try it. And even if you don't have a private tool that you've purchased, you can still use the public tools as long as you're not putting private or client information or private information. So there's still the ability to ask questions like, I just got this, what should I do with it? And you can still brainstorm, right, with these models and the different tools. So no matter what, figure out a way to get your attorneys to at least start using the technology. Obviously, it's much better if you can purchase a private tool. We actually built our own secure chat early on, probably within 6 months of ChatGPT coming out. And so we didn't have to worry about them putting client information or something in there. But I feel like you just have to use it. And I'm amazed when I talk to people, like even my niece and nephew, I was like, are you using ChatGPT? And they're like, no, what's that? And I'm like, are you kidding me? So I was like, so we played with it and wrote songs and sang stuff and all that stuff. Yeah, that, so I feel like I don't even know that the younger generation is definitely on board with it yet. And I feel like a lot of us older people say, oh, the young people are going to take care of it. But I'm not so sure. I think we have to show them that.
We used to say that about legal research, that they all know how to use Google, so they'll be able to be great with legal research, but it didn't quite work that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any advice, Josh, any advice you want to build on with you?
Buy Everlaw.
Well, I'm not going to go there on that one. But I would absolutely say, in the same vein that Julie was talking about, and I think this was a key theme at the conference, if you are not using this technology today, you need to start doing it. You need to find some way to start experimenting, start trying. If you don't have the policy in place, well, try to get that policy in place. If you don't have a tool that you can use, try to find your first tool to go and do that. If you have something, if you, let's say, have Everlaw, and there are certainly clients that I've talked to here who haven't started using our generative AI capabilities, you've got to start using them. Yeah. And so I think that's really the key message is the time is now and you really should start experimenting.
Yeah. Any last words of advice to build on?
Yeah. I was trying to think, is it the Black Mirror version or the uplifting one? But let's say uplifting. I think that both addressing, what lies ahead, thoughtfully but with earnest is exactly right. That regardless of the tool that you land on, you need to understand how to use it. It's going to become, I think, central to what we do and what a lot of people do. As I mentioned, I think Deep Dive has applications far beyond a legal tech system. And then the Black Mirror version is, I think Home Depot is offering trade skills courses so that you could bone up in case you need to find a new career when the computers replace this. But it's exciting. It needs to be done, thoughtfully. And I'm fortunate again to be able to be here, having learned from the folks in our firm, people who designed the warnings when we get to a, GPT product, the people who did the training, the policies, everything. They brought a curated package into my office and set it down. And it was, I think, the most interesting thing going on right now. And, here we are at the summit learning about where it's going next. So I just enjoy, but do it thoughtfully.
Yeah. When you mentioned you're retiring in 3 years, it just made me think of how many lawyers I've talked to who have just said, I'm retiring soon. Please dining in.
It's not because
you're not using retirement.
Actually, generative AI is the reason I'm staying on longer. I mean, and I feel like I'm on my third career now. So yeah, it's a whole new world.
It is. Well, Adam, Julie, Joshua, thanks so much for chat. It's been fun.
Thanks for joining us for today's show. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to share your own thoughts or comments, please do so. Just message me on LinkedIn or other social media, or shoot me an email, ambrogi@gmail.com. If you're a fan of the show, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. LawNext is a production of LawNext Media. I'm your host, Bob Ambrogi. I hope you'll join us again next time for another episode of LawNext.